Hi, everyone. This is Terry Bearden, Project Director for Organizational Capacity Building here at the National Community Action Partnership. Welcome to our second in a three-part series so far. We're talking about adding to this series in 2025, so stand by for more. This webinar is going to examine navigating the landscape of technology and data systems. So those of you who have participated in previous data-oriented webinars, and those of you who work in data every day will recognize the importance of technology and then creating those data systems, data cultures, all of that. So we're lucky to have two of our thought leaders in terms of that connection between technology and data systems, Emmett and Chris from Norwescap, and we will be hearing from them in just a moment. And so next slide, please. As you guys know, again, and welcome to those of you who are joining us now. If you don't mind, put your name, agency, and state in the chat. That would be great. So we like to ground ourselves in the promise of community action. Community action changes people's lives, embodies the spirit of hope, improves communities, and makes America a better place to live. We care about the entire community, and we are dedicated to helping people help themselves and each other. And here at NCAP, we recognize that it may have been a long night for some of you. We appreciate you joining us today, and we really ask you to live into the promise of community action as we move forward, because our mission remains unchanged and we remain the same organizations, the same dynamic people that we have always been, and we have work to do. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to Emmett and Chris, and I will come back at the end to ask you to complete an evaluation. So thank you, and thanks for joining.
Yes, thank you so much, Terry, and to the rest of the NCAP network for having us here today. We also want to thank everyone joining us virtually. Like Terry said, we know this might be a bit of a hangover day for some, so we appreciate you taking some time either before lunch or after lunch, guess depending on where you're joining us from. But my name is Emmett Slobodzian. I'm the Program Impact Manager at Norwescap.
And my name is Chris Snyder. I am the Evaluation and Research Manager at Norwescap.
So today we're going to be talking you through our journey of progressing our data culture at Norwescap through a step-by-step recap of implementing a data systems change. So we'll just do a little bit about Norwescap. We'll go into the RFP and search process for finding a system, the actual building of it, the training and implementation that goes into that, and then the benefits that we're starting to already reap from it. So a little bit about Norwescap. Our mission is to partner with individuals and families in creating pathways to achieve their hopes and dreams. And our vision is communities where engagement and collaboration lead to empowered lives with opportunity for all. And we serve the northwest portion of New Jersey, kind of where we get our name from. So the highlighted in teal there in the top right is our counties in particular. So a little bit of a reach geographically. I see some folks from Texas, so I know that you guys have a little bit of a larger footprint than us. So when we look at our work, Norwescap has over 20 programs serving 5 counties at around 20,000 participants each year. So with a scale like this, you can imagine how data management can be a major complication. But we'll be getting into how we're actually handling our data throughout this presentation. So for now, just to summarize kind of what we're actually doing as an organization, we distilled it down to these 5 program pillars. So we're not really a crisis center. However, we do receive people on their worst days, and we never turn anyone away. So a lot of our programs support immediate needs such as food, shelter, and healthcare. And our goal is to help navigate people through these major life events to get to the status of thriving, right? We're all using the Roma model. We want to help people become financially secure. We strive to help people achieve their financial independence through adult education, childcare supports, employment and career assistance, and financial coaching. Promoting health and wellness is really important. We offer a robust foundation of wellness for expectant mothers, infants and children, and adults in need. We also are one of the state's USDA affiliated food banks, which is on track to distribute 3.3 million pounds of food to just 3 counties for this year alone. So a lot of throughput through them. We want to build stronger families, right? We believe that the family unit is the bedrock of individual development and well-being. We have programs focused on enhancing family stability, enriching parenting skills, and fostering nurturing environments. And then lastly, we want to create a thriving community, right? Norwescap is deeply involved in community efforts aimed at creating opportunities that help people succeed in their own hometowns, particularly in low-income and underserved neighborhoods. So when we talk about this presentation, we wanted to really only have like one ground rule that we can all kind of agree on and keep in the back of our minds, is that, you know, this is intended to be informational, not instructional, right? This process is not a one size fits all. And we hope that, you know, you take something away from here that you can either apply to your own organization or at least just begin conversations. Everyone is unique in their own both in terms of your staff as well as the services you provide, right? So you're not all going to have the same services as us. We understand that. But while we, you know, do have our differences, we all are also faced with similar limitations, right? Amount of time in the day, technology aversion within the staff, having enough budget to support something like this, having the internal capacity to actually design something. So basically what we're saying is this worked for us. And we want to share our process so that if you're considering making changes, you might be able to save a little time with some of our lessons learned. And please, as we go through, if you have any questions in the chat, if you want to throw them in the chat, we'll try and keep up with them. Otherwise, we should have a little time at the end. So we'll start everything off with just the search, right? So when we talk about searching for a data system, what we're really looking at doing is trying to get a CRM. So for those that are uninitiated, CRM is a customer relationship management software. And it's basically the combination of practices and technology that we use to manage customer interactions and analyze our data points, ultimately to improve customer service. And we highlighted that last part there because it's a really important point to make, right? We offer support to participants before and after they receive a service. We try our hardest to ground our work in empathy and make the process as smooth as possible. But it's not always possible to do both, right? So speaking just for Norwescap, we do a really good job of rooting our efforts in with participants in patience and kindness. But like many other nonprofits on here, or other CAPs or CAAs, you know, technical components could take away from our efforts and how they're being received by clients or participants. Things like our response rates, the complexity of forms, processes, having to repeat oneself multiple times for each program, you know, the list kind of goes on and on. But this is ultimately where our project began, right? Observing our satisfaction scores. They measure pretty high, but they also were plateauing. We're not seeing any really, you know, major increases. And we kind of get the same criticism every once in a while about, you know, processes being a little too complex. So that's why we felt the need to prioritize the customer relationship management software here at Norwescap. And we'll get into how we actually did that. So here is a kind of overly simplified process that we took, and we'll zoom in on the components of this throughout the presentation, but it really gets distilled down to 3 stages, right? The pre, the during, and where we're at now, the post. So the pre-planning searching is kind of in that teal color, and it started all the way back in August of 22 and lasted for about 10 months of just evaluating our needs, putting RFPs out there, and then ultimately making a decision of how we wanted to move forward. The actual building in that navy color is everything from data cleaning to system development, testing, kind of all the down and dirty elements of designing a system. And then the launch here at the end is it took place in January of this year. So the whole process really took almost about 2 years to get us where we're at today. We include evaluation on this because we're constantly just trying to check in with ourselves and check in with the staff to make sure we're delivering on expectations. So to look at the first stage, we began with an evaluation of needs, and here are our top reasons why we wanted to make a switch. So if any of these resonate, maybe it's also something you want to consider at your organization. So first off, we needed a centralized solution that could really commit us to that whole family support approach. We needed programs to be informed of the going-ons of each family that we're helping, that's being helped by other programs. So we kind of sort of have that in our old system, but we need this to be, at the utmost level. Data quality is really important as well. Again, we had good, not great data quality system before, so we need better reporting to make sure that our quality is up to standards. We wanted to create roadmaps for success for our participants, which requires advanced data and, for us to be able to discover common paths among our most successful participants. Automation is kind of king right now, right? We value our staff's time, and we know that data entry feels like excess and a burden for sure, especially when that time could just be reinvested into our participants. That customer service element. So we need a system that could handle automation. And then lastly, thinking back to that definition of CRM, we wanted to improve our customer satisfaction scores. So we began our process by checking in with the staff for if that desire of change was mutual. So we started documenting commonly heard staff feedback, which supported us saying, okay, this does warrant looking into. The feedback kind of came back into 3 categories here listed on the left. Our big picture connections, right? Our systems don't easily integrate, which forces there to be some level of duplication of entry. Our current system troubles, right? Sometimes it could be unreliable, sometimes it could be slow, unexpected crashes or glitches or whatever, right? So it just increases that burden of effort there. And then also with that current system, we needed more usable data if we wanted to progress our data culture. And then the last bucket was kind of workflow process related thoughts, right? There's no way to keep up with every single staff change happening at our organization. So it's really hard to know who should they be referring to for a participant. Is that referral actually being worked on? What's the progress of that? So we needed that centralized information. And then automation, again, like we said, that's so important to save time in people's days. And then on the right side is kind of that list of things that we were hearing. And we distilled it down to 3 buckets there: things that we must have in a system, things that we would like to have, and then the things that are nice to have, right? So the color coding here is our current system or our old system did really well if it's in green, did okay if it's in orange, and then it was just missing if it was in red. So our old system hit our must-haves pretty well, and touched on some of our wants and are nice to have. So this was actually really empowering for us to see, because it meant if we don't find a system we love, we don't have to make a change. We have an ace kind of up our sleeve here where we don't have to get into an investment we don't want to stay with. So all that leads to our RFP process. We send that list out to a bunch of different vendors that we were looking at, and ask them to get back to us. Which things can they cover from our list? Which things can they not? What's the estimated cost if the things on our list are extra fees associated with it? What their timelines of implementation, right? We asked for everything from these folks. And this is one of those times that we want to kind of harken back to our ground rule, right? So if you see the system that you're currently using on here and you think it's plotted poorly, or if you see a system on here that you were considering but you hated, right? That's kind of the whole thing, is that this is informational, not instructional. So this is kind of how everything broke out for us. We used what we recommend is having a kind of the gold standard of a totally unbiased rubric to grade these systems, right? So how well does it do on this function? Score 1 to 5 or 0 to 5, right? How well was it working with the sales rep, right? These are people that you're going to be working with for months. If you are having difficulty getting back from them, that should be points off. So ultimately, this is how everything kind of plotted on a matrix of cost versus function. And when you do that, it was easy for us to see, what are some of those, what's the low-hanging fruit one, what covers a lot of our functions, but at not too much of a cost. And that helps us arrive at our Goldilocks decision. So Dynamics plotted perfectly on that, and Chris will touch on that in a second. But basically, we loved Dynamics because it unifies all of our systems. We already use the Microsoft suite of products for our emailing, for our dashboarding in Power BI, for our internal intranet in SharePoint. Right, we use it for everything else. So this kind of made sense to go with logically. However, when we looked at Dynamics, it kind of existed in two different spots on our matrix, where with some vendors, it was extraordinarily expensive. So if you've heard expensive quotes from them before, that's entirely possible. But what we decided to do was go onto Microsoft's website. They have a list of nonprofit partners that they work with. So we found one that was much more affordable, one that was really great to work with. So that gave them, tons of extra credit points on our rubric. And that organization was called Boyer, which I think we talk about a little bit later as well. So with all of that, let's talk about the actual process. I'm going to pass it over to Chris.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Emmett. So, like Emmett mentioned, this next bit's going to be a bit more informational about the overall process, the steps that we, again, recommend following. It's going to be a little bit of that higher level because based on, your agency size and scale and scope, your steps may differ slightly. So following that rule, right, where these are not instructional steps to follow, but that kind of bigger picture information of what you should expect to see if you want to follow along with this process. We're going to jump into the 4 kind of main steps that you're going to take, whether your organization is planning on adopting a brand new data system, a new CRM, or transitioning from one that you have that is existing in your agency, but maybe doesn't fit all of your needs. And looking at just one of the questions we've received already, right? You may have a lot of these different disjointed data systems. For things like your HUD funding, your Head Start programs, things like that. For us, the CRM is this place where it will all try and coexist. And that's really what the C is, it is going to be this centralized data platform that we're trying to make. And we'll show you the steps on how to get there. So the first step, of course, is going to be finish that actual search process. Like Emmett mentioned, you may have a bunch of different programs or platforms or vendors that you've experienced. Your chart's going to look a little bit different than ours potentially, but we'll step through why our chart looks the way it does. And you're going to want to start with your actual kind of development timeline. We did not know how long this process was going to take going in. We were a little bit caught off guard by that. So having a timeline is definitely just going to help with a smooth kind of build process here. Generally, our second phase is going to be in identifying what capacity and stakeholders you have at your agency. What partners do you have or need? Do you have some tech-savvy staff that will be able to take this on? Will you rely wholly on a third-party vendor to help maintain it? Depends on, this will depend on your agency. And then just as part of that, identify the knowledge gaps that you may have. Where do we not have some existing documentation? Part of this process was we figured out a whole lot of what we knew and what we didn't know, unfortunately. The third phase is going to be in really building out this robust body of documentation before you can even get to your data system, because you have to build your system off of something. You have to have this foundation of everything about your programs, what KPIs you want to have that you're counting. And then the last step is going to be actually preparing all of your data that you may have from an existing system, or really trying to just compile all of the data you may have if you're coming purely from, pen and paper, hard copies, or Excel files. So jumping right in, we're looking at this graph. Ideally, right, we want to be picking a system that's on the bottom right-hand quadrant wherever possible, where we just have the most functionality available to us at the lowest overall cost, because this may be one system of many that we're using, because we do have other funders that will require their own systems be used for their own programs, right? So to kind of put a big pin in everything we're about to say, this is to really help facilitate this overall data system. We're never going to be able to get around, these other funder mandated platforms. But ideally, this is a place where all of that other data, if you're already using those, can be funneled into. So you can look at your whole agency-wide impact in one location. And then ideally, we'll be trying to avoid, any agencies, right, that are high cost, low function. And again, this was just our very subjective view based on the scale we were looking at. Your mileage will vary. Certainly, some things you may want to consider when you're putting a chart like this together are going to be the cost per user or the cost per license. The actual setup cost, if there is one. Other technical things, maybe how easy it is to get your data in and out of the system. So there's a whole list of these considerations that you'll want, but based on how we put our chart together, we'll see, Dynamics, Microsoft Dynamics came up being what we wanted to use as our centralized data system. So we did have a couple of front runners to consider, including a mandated system that we have in the state that we thought could be a CRM and that had hit some of our wants, but we wanted to kind of go one step above that with this big centralized system. And like Emmett mentioned, as part of this process, you may find that a system you are already using is going to fit all of your needs currently. So that's kind of my motto for this whole section, is really just measure twice and cut once. Like Emma said, you don't want to really commit to a full rebuild of everything if it is working to fit all of your needs already. Some of the reasons we did pick Dynamics is, like I mentioned, we have a very Microsoft heavy office. Our state uses Microsoft. Your mileage certainly will vary if you use Google or another provider for your other platforms. So these are all these considerations that you'll want to make as you're picking your system. Each of these systems will have better or worse integrations with other platforms. Your agency needs are going to be unique to ours. And so, while we can say we like this one, for us, this is not necessarily going to be an endorsement of the product for you as a whole, or any of the kind of names that we're mentioning, right? So now really doing that dive into what the steps are once we have the system that we've picked, we want to go about building our data system and really start with the centralized, building our centralized data system. The first thing we have to do is identify the stakeholders and what the capacities are at our agency. Your stakeholders are going to be really who's going to be using the system every day. Who's your frontline staff that will be putting the data into the system that will be using it? What members of your IT team, if you have one, will need to be involved to help manage this this platform? Do you need to help manage licenses for each of your users? Is this going to be a thing where staff will now need different hardware, or more laptops or better internet access, things like that? If you have any internal evaluators or data team or other people that are particularly interested or involved in the reporting at your agency, they'll be very helpful in this step, because you're going to need someone familiar with what your reporting obligations are. For the same reason, you should also try to include your development team or your grant writers, because they will have all of the different obligations that your agency is currently being funded to provide. So that's your list of all the KPIs right there, is what your funding obligations are. And you got to talk to your grant writers. You may have an external grant writer as well, or an external evaluator that you can reach in to and ask for some assistance there in identifying those. In the same vein, you'll want to make sure you have someone from your finance team on board, just to make sure that the costs of implementing this system are in fact reasonable, and where it's getting actually paid from. And then definitely during this process, involve the staff that will be using it, as well as your other agency leadership. What data needs to go into the system? And then ideally, what data is coming out? What do you hope to achieve? What findings are you looking for? What's the goal? And these will be people either internal to your organization. If you don't have some of these folks in your organization, depending on which platform you choose, you will likely have a lot of support that is coming from this vendor that you've selected. So a lot of the times they will provide the technical support for building the system. They'll answer a lot of the questions and provide tech support for it. If you have any other fellow agencies that are working on these other, working on building these data systems, rely on them. They're going to be in your shoes and very likely will have additional lessons learned to what we're, on top of what we're sharing with you today. So once you have all of your kind of partners and who's going to be involved, just generally at the ready here, before we start building, we need to have this plan. And this is that really big, measure twice, cut once. It's going to really slow you down if you don't have a really firm foundation of this documentation, because you'll have to go back and forth a lot during this process. So if we put the calories in to really having just a lot of documentation, I know it's not the most exciting thing to hear, but having this really firm foundation of your plan for the new data system is going to really help streamline the process of building and then adopting your new data system. And the good news is a lot of this work has been done for us, because as a CAP or CAA, we all have CAP plans, and very likely we've all seen the smart forms or other documentation that gives us the really big list of all of the allowable KPIs that we can report on. And generally, that's going to be one of the largest time sinks, is if we had to build that inventory of what it is we want to track from scratch. So a lot of the hard work has been done for us. So we strongly recommend review your smart forms or the other documentation available by the DCA about what the current SRV and FNPI, as well as the CNPI, services and outcomes are. That's your big list of what it is we want to report on. Separate from that, you'll want to go ahead and make sure that you're documenting basically almost a carbon copy of your CAP plan. What does your agency really look like? In your CAP plan, what focus areas do you have? What programs do you have that are working within those focus areas? What services do those programs provide? And then what outcomes do we expect to see from those programs? Because each of those services or outcomes is going to get matched with one SRV or FNPI indicator for our reporting. If you're coming from not having a central data system, that's going to be one of your biggest hurdles. So we really encourage you to lean on your documented CAP plan and the smart form or equivalent that you have from your state agency, because it's going to give you the bulk of your documentation that you need to get started on this process. Another thing just to consider as we're going forward with adopting any new data management system, have a plan for what the expectation is of your staff to document each service and outcome. And by that, I mean, is every service documented every single time it happens? Do we document it once per week? Are we documenting program attendance, for example? And another thing is be mindful of the units that you want to document. Are we trying to measure increments of time? Is it dollar value? Is it weight of produce? Things like that. So using this CAP plan and the KPI inventory, we're going to start to get a really good sense of what we want to measure and how. And for those who may not have seen their smart forms recently, here is just a copy of as written the SRV bank and the FNPI bank for that first pillar out of our smart form. So these are already going to be pretty descriptive for us to use, and we know we need to use these because this is the obligation that we have to the DCA. So again, they've done a lot of the heavy lifting for us. This is something we just want to make sure that we have available as we're planning out the system, because we'll need all this information once we start approaching how we want to report on this information. We have to know what we want to report on, otherwise we're not going to be able to collect it as effectively. And this is, again, just that recommended structure of how we would try and recommend agencies wanting to adopt a new system, try and document their hierarchy of what their programs do. So underneath each focus area, it could be, for example, food and nutrition program. You'll have programs that would operate as a food bank or a pantry, and then the services would be delivering food, the outcomes being increasing food security. And then you'd align whatever SRV or FNPI is appropriate to each of those services and outcomes that you've listed per program here in that mapping. But if you go into this process with a very clearly mapped, this becomes your roadmap for building out your new data system, especially if you are trying to consolidate these reports that you have from other concurrent data systems that you may be required to be using from your other funders. If you have Head Start, HUD, any other systems like that. The more well documented your mapping is here, the easier your overall collective reporting is going to be. So now that we've mapped everything, what we want to do is collect our records and just prepare for that big data import. So we have our vendor selected. We have our roadmap essentially of how all of our services are going to get documented. What we really need to do now is piece together two main tables. We just did this in an Excel file. Depending on your other reporting platforms, you'll likely have to compile a bunch of these different files together and really merge them into one big file. So if you're starting from scratch and you don't currently have any digital data system, the main goal is you'll want to try and consolidate all of your different records into two Excel files or two big tables. One is going to be a list of all of the unique households that you have, and then the other will contain all of the unique participants that you have. And this recommendation comes because of how we report to the DCA. That's the precision that we provide in all of our demographic reporting. So you'll want to maintain those as two separate tables. Again, we recommend you lean on the smart forms and other documentation the DCA has given us, because that's going to give you all of the permissible options in your reporting. And those will be for the demographic traits, what age range buckets we may want to see, any other aggregations, things like that. So especially if you're coming from scratch and need to build a brand new system that's going to match all of your DCA reporting, lean on the smart form. It's there. It's going to give you all of your reporting requirements right there. And we definitely recommend trying to digitize and then deduplicate as many of these households and participants as possible before trying to import anything into the new system. It's going to help save a lot of time. You can import information a lot faster and a lot more reliably than you can enter it in by hand. So putting the calories forward at the beginning and really front loading that effort into digitizing as much as possible is going to save your agency a lot of effort in the long run, as far as starting really strong with this system. If you're moving from an old system or trying to consolidate a bunch of these other systems, try and export as much data as possible that you have from each of these systems. You should likely identify a cutoff point. You are going to have some amount of data loss, and there's going to be an acceptable amount of data loss. You may not want to bring over the last decade's worth of data, for example, if we're not super confident in how accurately or how up to date some of that data may be. Based on the other systems, they may also be calculating or storing these demographic traits or other information differently than how the DCA would like that information. So your agency and between your data team or whoever's implementing your new data system and your vendor, you'll need to come to a decision of what information you want to keep and what information may be lost. You may end up losing some precision in your data here. I see a question there. Yes, to clarify, we recommend having two tables, one table of all of your unique participants, and then a second table of all of your unique households. And we'll touch on the why there in just a moment. That's a great question. Thank you. And then as always, if you're coming from a digital system that you already have, you'll likely have even more duplicate records if you have participants participating in multiple programs. So you'll have a lot of potentially conflicting data. It could be you have conflicting contact information, conflicting address information, things like that. So it will be a little bit of a slog. Do be prepared for that. That is why our data cleaning phase did take so long in our roadmap. But again, front loading that effort and really starting with as clean data as possible is going to make the rest of this process really smooth and really impactful for your teams. Now, regardless of what your original record keeping system was, you're going to want to make two more tables. And one is going to be just a big copy of that smart form, essentially, because you're going to want to know what all of your KPIs are. This is going to be all of your services, all of your outcomes, And then you may have additional services or outcomes that you need to track in addition to your reporting obligation to the DCA. Either because they don't have an indicator for it, or it's something that your agency works on that's outside their scope of work generally. So you may need to add and maintain your own additional list of KPIs on top of what's in that smart form. You're going to have to work with your grant writers or your development team to figure out if you happen to have any of these extra reporting KPIs that you want to track, but you'll want to put them all together in one big table. And that's going to be this big list of everything you'll be able to report on and track in your system. As you're going to be working with a vendor to build your new data system, they are going to need a list of all the KPIs. Then you'll make table number 4, which is going to be that model table that we had shown previously. And that's just that list of what service belongs to what program and in what part of your CAP plan, just to have a really nice map of where every single service and every single outcome might be expected to be. And the reason we're keeping the services and the KPIs slightly separate is just because you can have multiple services that all feed into the same KPI, and you'll want to count those individuals served together. And as before, this is at this point in the process is where we'll want to figure out what are we reporting when we try and document this service. Is it just that a service has occurred? Are we trying to document the dollar value associated with that service in the event of it being a stipend or a scholarship or dollar equivalent voucher, things like that? Are we trying to document weight, or is it time duration? Whatever the unit of that service we want to document as well. This is where we want to make sure we're recording that. So at this stage in the setup, we have 4 tables, 2 of which are going to be our household and participants. And then we'll have 2 lookup tables, which is going to be our programs and our KPIs. And these are in our experience, the 4 minimum tables that you'll need to give to whatever program you're partnering with. So whichever software vendor you pick, they'll need really at a minimum these 4 tables in order to help import all of your information and get you ready to use your new system. Optionally, if you want to, and you have a lot of confidence in and are able to export all of your old service and outcome data, you may want to have that as well, so you can import that into your new central system in order to have that historic log. For our use case, in our experience, we had a very firm cutoff date, and we did not actually import any of our services and outcomes because we had a very difficult time matching them all together across all of our systems. Your experience may vary depending on the tools that you use, but that's also part of a recommendation of being mindful in when you want to implement your data system. And so we picked the beginning of our CSBG funding year. So it was a completely reasonable time to start. We had a clean slate as far as what we were expecting all of our service and outcome entry to be. If you have a lot of data that you really want to make sure you have access to, you can try to do the import, but be mindful that that might be a whole lot of information, and that's going to slow down your time to implementing your new data system. And then the last thing that we've already covered just in the process of putting all this together is you'll have a list of your agency's reporting obligation. You may have a lot of different programs that may not always be in communication with each other about when their reports are due to what funders. And so you'll need to know what timelines you have for your reporting and when this information is needed. That's going to advise and inform how your data gets entered or imported into the system, and when you need to run your reports, what frequency you might need that at. So the final step.
Chris, sorry,
Yep.
there was a hand up there.
Oh, thank you.
I don't know if you're able to come off mute. I saw the hand go back down.
Hi, Melody. I am unable to see you to unmute you. Hold on 1 second. Let me find you. There you are. Hold on. Okay, go ahead, Melody.
I'm sorry, I actually did not mean to raise my hand. Go ahead, I'm listening.
Oh, no, now you got to come up with something brilliant to ask.
No, we're
Thank
getting
you.
ready to do all of this, so I'm taking notes. Please continue.
Awesome, thank you.
Not a problem. Yeah, so right now, following along in these general steps here, we're at the point where we want to import all of our good data. And I'm just going to stress that we're going to import only our good data. We'll have done a whole lot of data cleaning by this point in the process. And we have to come to terms with, hey, what is that acceptable loss of data? If you have a certain time frame where you want to just cut off everybody behind. If you are looking at your data and you find, hey, at xyz.com isn't really a valid email address, let's not import that, right? So your mileage may vary on how much data cleaning you want to do, but definitely you'll want to start with as clean data as possible. For a lot of these data systems, they will be a lot less gentle about kicking back your bad data, and you'll end up with surprise missing data. So a really thorough review of cleaning up your data, getting it imported. You'll have those 4 tables, as well as optionally your old service and outcome data, if that's something that's very important to you to retain in that current system. We've not removed or deleted any of our old data. Certainly, we don't want to advise that. But we just didn't see the value in bringing it into our new system for historic purposes. And now that we're a year in, I think it's safe to say we've not actually relied on a lot of the historic data. We're really looking forward with our service delivery now. And then the other last step, really, after you've built everything, you've done all this planning, you have all your tables, just plan how, when, and who is responsible for adding the new data. This is going to be where all of your new information is entered, ideally agency-wide. So who is responsible for it? How frequently are people going to be entering that data? Who is responsible for entering the data? How many people on your teams are going to need to access this system? So there's a little bit of a consideration for the cost if you're paying per user. How many people really are going to be doing data entry? Do you want to give licenses or access to staff who are only just going to be looking at the data? Is it easier to have someone that can just run reports for the teams instead of giving everyone a license? So these are all just things to consider. And then consider what ability your new system will have to just keep on importing other data in bulk. So the best CRM system is going to be something that you can interact with very easily. But if we have some programs that will be having a lot of their services or their clients that can be reported or exported on, we don't need to go ahead and have purely duplicated effort, right? The main shift for us in adopting a new system, just period, was we wanted a reliable way to import data from all of our other systems, because we saw that we had been expending, a considerable amount of staff time on duplicate data entry. So they would enter it into their primary system that their funder had required, and then we're entering it into our separate system, and it really was doing twice the effort for almost all of our record keeping, and it becomes a little bit of a game of telephone at that point. So consider if you can take the reports that you generate from your current programs and use those as imports as well. So that's another key question that you want to ask either your data team that's working on this internally or the vendor that you have. So as you're working with them, kind of prime them to say, hey, here's what my data looks like when I export it. Can we import off of this, or what steps do we need just to import from that? So we've set everything up. When does building this thing stop, and when do we actually start using it? So the minimum viable product that you need in order to have this data system ready to go, you need to be able to create new records and edit your existing records. Seems straightforward. You got to make new things and be able to make those changes. You should be able to already have imported your best available data with the acceptable loss. So you have all of your good data in this new system ready to go, ready to add new information to it or edit to correct anything that may not have worked in the import. And then you'll really be ready to go once your new system has the ability to either export the data just as raw data, whether it has its own baked-in dashboarding functionality, or any other reporting capability that you can start with, because there's not going to be any reason to spend all the effort adding new information until you can get it back out in that meaningful report. But that's your minimum viable product for this data system. And you should launch ideally when you have a natural break in your program years. We know that you may have very different program years. For your Head Start programs, that'll be the school calendar, which is going to be very different from our DCA year or your state fiscal year or anything like that. So we know there's going to be a lot of calendars you have to juggle. Try to find a natural break in one of them, and we recommend starting at the start of one of those calendars. Our implementation also started with a pilot team. So our most client-facing team was our first team to use the system, and they were really critical in stress testing it, finding things that didn't work, and they really put it through the ringer. And so we found a lot of things we didn't get right the first try, but we were able to fix. And so we recommend starting with that pilot team or get some folks that want to be your early adopters. If you throw everybody in all at once, you'll likely have a very difficult time launching this new system. If for no other reason, then that's going to be a whole lot of staff to try and support all at once. And you may not have all your training documentation ready yet. So just to sum up all of our lessons learned on the kind of the technical how, and I appreciate that was a little bit of a dry section there. We really strongly encourage you to be strategic with your system selection. Consider all of these little details. Will the system that you want play nice with all of the other technology that you have? Reach out to your IT team, see if there's any integrations or reasons why it wouldn't work right away. Try and leverage all of the existing documentation that you have access to. The DCA has done a lot of the legwork here on really giving us a nice, clean foundation of what they expect. And these are pretty good KPIs for almost all of our other development needs. We've only ever had to add a few on top of it. So that's going to be a really good foundation for your teams to start with. And really spend the calories and just start strong on getting that documentation and that plan before you've done a data import. Really try to clean your data, really try to map everything out kind of to the best of your ability. We spent a lot of time in our development process learning a lot about our programs, and in some of our other data systems, we had services that, well, we found out maybe we stopped doing these, a couple of years ago because the funding changed or the funder changed or whatever the case may be. That change never made it into our data system. So we ended up doing a lot of cleaning up. So, measure twice, cut once, really plan ahead on it, and you'll have a much smoother process adopting the system. And the last kind of nugget of wisdom we want to share, especially just with building a system, is really try to launch once you have that minimum viable product, because you can always expand on it once it's working. It's really easy to sit and want to wait until the product is going to be, perfect. But we're always arriving and never arrived to that. We're still making changes to the system a year on. And if we had, delayed for that year, certainly our data quality would have been a lot worse for it. So with that, I'm going to give it back to Emmett, and we'll talk a little bit about how to actually adopt this system and do some of the training necessary to help get all of your teams up to speed.
Thank you, Chris. Everyone got all that? Good, because it's time to train your staff on how to navigate the complexity of what you just did behind the scenes for the past 6 months. So you're going to be so deeply involved with it that this thing like the back of your hand. But seriously, we put all that, we know it's a lot of info there. We wanted to include all those details because these slides and this recording will be shared after this call. So hopefully this gives you a clear project management blueprint of the steps you have to take and the key elements for each step. So we value the importance of first people kind of through the wall who can share this out, makes it a lot easier for everyone else. So when we talk about training for using this new system, we don't have to spend too much time on this, right? There's nothing really new we can add to the conversation about training staff or training people. We've all have been through that when we onboard new staff, right? But just here are the 3 pillars that we really focused on with our training. Learn from your test group, right? We spent a month with them kind of breaking it in, understanding the special quirks of it, figuring out what all the little fixes are. That gave us all the shortcuts and the call outs that were so valuable for them to learn it, that we could then translate to the January group, just how, like, what is important and what simplifies it. And that goes right into that second bullet point of keeping your language simple. We spent 6 months on the back end of this thing, designing it from an out-of-the-box solution to tailoring it for Norwescap's verbiage and jargon. Just keep the language down to the need-to-knows, the simple, and like communicate it with enthusiasm too, right? That way everyone comes into this feeling prepared and feeling excited. And then lastly, having a strong resource library. So your vendor might offer you some training materials, definitely take those, but we recommend designing your own, right? So we offered live trainings that we did 3 to 4 different live trainings in the first week, offered it at different times of day, different days a week to be more accommodating for schedules. And the thing that we learn here, though, is that everyone learns in a different way, but a lot of people learn in multiple ways. So we wanted to be sure to have as many resources as possible to guarantee our success. So those live trainings were essential for the launch, but then we created PDFs for the crowd that just likes to print it out, keep it on their desk, jot notes in the margin. We pair those with short videos demonstrating exactly the click-throughs on the PDF, so you can kind of follow both at the same time. It's also way more enjoyable to only watch a 2 to 3 minute video as opposed to rewatching that hour-and-a-half long class. We created a FAQ list for commonly asked questions, just as like time savers. We're always adding to that list the more we get from there. And then the last thing here is just to make sure that they're all centralized to one location. So we have an internal intranet, which we mentioned before, using Microsoft SharePoint. We put everything that is that people might need to refine or look for on there. It's always the updated version of it. We know a lot of things kind of get updated and are floating between Teams chats or old emails. It's like, nope, just go to this one page. That's where everything is. But technical training is pretty standard, but we realize this is really an opportunity to be training culture as much as training a system. So when we talk about data culture, it's really like a continuum of best practices with the goal to be moving from basic understanding and basic usage to more moderate to more advanced levels. However, the trick with this is that the whole organization can't be fully transformed unless every single layer buys in and grows together, right? So for Norwescap, our leadership has really put intentionality towards progressing our culture by making investments to address internal know-how, right? Bringing Chris and myself on. This really brings up that bullet point of the know-how and the capabilities. That then led to, because we have a data specific team now, we can test program enhancements scientifically. We have our data sources have become more known and controllable. Our systems are advancing. However, we can't move up that continuum unless all parts of the org buy in. So that's why we needed to make culture just as much part of the training as the technical click-throughs. So when we talk about changing that culture with staff, it's the war that goes on really is for people that are resistant to change or have that adversity towards technology. It always comes down to that, tell me what I have to do. Tell me what's necessary. Is this required of me? What is excess, right? So to combat that, there's really 3 main bullet points for it. 1, go into these conversations with an understanding that your system and or processes probably do have the limitations they're complaining about. So it's not just, I'm tired of doing this work. There really might be, some rust on the machine that you have to polish away. When you're having these dialogues, be prepared to make concessions. You probably are going to find common ground of what has just been gathering and building up over the years, as far as I've always been asked to put it in this way, right? Like that was many years ago. We are making progress and changes here. Let's get rid of some of that excess. And then lastly, keeping people in the loop, right? We always talk about the why do we do things. Like how info is used is important, but go beyond the standard, script language of, oh, we use it for grant writing. Our funders like to know it. Our board needs to know it, or whatever that is, right? Get specific, show the reporting capabilities, put them on a list to receive frequent reports so they understand what's going in the system. What am I getting out of it? Show them how you can develop narratives from data, right? It's not just the numbers, it's stories that we're really looking to tell here. And it's so hard to find those stories when you're just looking at an Excel sheet. And if you do it right, you might spark something in someone, and they might go from, being a data author to being a data consumer. And that's what moving up that continuum is. And then the last little bit here, I'll go through this real quick, right? We need to prune bad behaviors with this. Just like how Chris said, we don't want to import bad data. We don't need that as the fresh first thing on our whiteboard here. So for us, those were timeliness. Many of our programs were working on like a 28-day lead time on their, or delay time on their entering their services, which is not a great schedule to keep if you want to answer the question of how did last month track to the previous month, or how did last month track to the year last year, right? A strong data-driven culture would not have to wait an extra month to tell you how you did 2 months ago. And then for us, completeness, right? Programs can be really good at entering case notes or entering services. The gold standard is to be good at both of those. So professional development was the first step in this launch, and will always need to be revisited, not just for onboarding times, but just as refreshers, right?
So then I'll really quickly touch on kind of what is the end result? What's the benefit? Why have we put all this effort into, cleaning up our data, running through all these trainings? How do we actually leverage this new system to get that meaningful information? And as a really top level summary, because all of your reporting needs will be unique to your agencies, except for the DCA obligation, because we all have that together. But ideally, from the least complexity to the most complexity, your central data system is going to allow you to collect your client data and then record client progress along that either plan or roadmap to success that you have for each of your clients. You'll be able to monitor the progress using the ROA scale, whatever roadmaps that you have, or however your teams are using that service log. They'll be able to see it directly in that system as a user of the system. So they won't have to go and hunt for information in an Excel sheet. It won't be already pre-aggregated or things like that. You'll have the information in your hands, and we can really have an opportunity to funnel all of your information from your different programs into this one location to see side by side, where we might otherwise have had very siloed information, for Head Start, for WIC, any other program, etc. The second main leveraging point here is accessing that client data. So you'll have real-time access to this information in your system. As long as we're putting the data in kind of as it's happening, ideally you'll have access to all this information and you'll get pretty to-the-day accurate reports coming out of your system. Once all these report templates get spun up or you have dashboarding in your system, it should be as accurate as frequently as the staff are entering the data, right? So this is going to handle a lot of the automation of just calculating all the things you want to know. How many people did we reach in a certain time frame? How many services did I log? All these kind of top level numbers you want to see. A lot of this will start to be auto-calculated for you just by using the system in your day-to-day. A main benefit that you can expect to see from adopting a central system is this self-service reporting, where a program manager, a staff member, some data consumer on your team wants to know something about a program, about a client, and have that overall aggregated reporting of my program has served X many people and these are the services they received. So again, taking a lot of the effort of that manual data calculation away and putting the ability to run reports directly into your program staff's hands is going to help their day-to-day run a lot smoother, just by making this data more readily available for consumption. And what our team is most excited about, this was admittedly one of the benefits for why, again, we elected to adopt a Microsoft product. Your mileage may vary on that, but we've been able to leverage much more substantial interactive reporting for our managers and our program directors, because we've been using all of the raw data coming out of our system to build much more interactive or advanced data aggregation of transformations. This has just opened up a whole new door of possible analyses that we can run. We can look at all of our data in a much more interesting and interactive way as a very quick screenshot of just what might be possible, maybe get some gears turning. We've built a giant multi-page dashboard, and very quickly, any one of our staff can open up, change a date filter, a service geography filter, or a program filter, and kind of find that by the numbers report of what we're looking for. And so this is the eventual end goal of, why are we putting all this effort in? Why are we doing this multi-year long process potentially and cleaning up our data and building this unique system? And the end result is all of then the time you will save on the back end, in your reporting, in your program monitoring, being able to just ask new questions about your programs and figuring out how you can better reach or better meet the needs of your clients. I see a question. So we used Power BI to make this dashboard. And we'll just say as a technical benefit, Microsoft Power BI works very well with Microsoft Dynamics. But again, based on your current IT infrastructure, your experience may vary, and there's other tools available that can work better with other platforms. So I see that we're approaching the top of the hour, so I'll give it back to Emmett just to close us off.
Yeah, we'll just skip over kind of the current and future plans. Basically, we're just in an evaluation phase, seeing how our baseline numbers are. In the future, we're going to get great year-over-year data and all that. But really, the thing we want to highlight here, and we put our contact info in the chat, and Chris, thank you for putting that up there. So if you have any questions on this, like, we want to continue sharing our knowledge, right? We don't want to keep this isolated to our organization. We think everyone should be moving towards that customer service model. So please, email us if you ever want to set up time to talk. I think Terry also posted in the chat a link to the SurveyMonkey. Chris, if you want to go maybe to the next slide, they can also get that QR code. So again, thank you everybody for joining us. We know we ran right to overtime, so we appreciate you staying with us.
All right, thanks, guys. We really appreciate your perspectives, your expertise. This is exactly the type of information we were hoping to bring to the network. So there are a couple of other slides at the end of the presentation that will be available once all of this is uploaded by the end of the week to the NCAP resource library webpage, landing page. And again, as Emmett said, please snag the evaluation link out of the chat or the QR code here. And we will thank you again for your time and hope to see you in a few weeks at the next Peer Data webinar. Thanks, guys. Really appreciate your time, Chris and Emmett.
Of course, thank you.
Thanks for having us.